So, your art sucks. Here's the question, what now? If you're an artist, I'm sure there have been plenty of times in your life where you've spent a lot of energy on a drawing only to look down and realize it's bad. This happens to all of us, no matter how long you've been making art. So the question isn't really how to avoid making bad art, but instead it's asking what you should do when you do make bad art. I worked on an illustration this weekend that, quite frankly, sucked. Sucked so bad, I really thought I was going to have to give up on the whole entire thing and start over. But I was eventually able to turn that drawing into something sort of passable. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to talk about how I accomplished that and give you 3 simple tips for what to do when you look at your art and you just think it's really bad. But before we begin, hi, I'm Kiwi Kana, a freelance illustrator and comic artist, and I love to share my tips and tricks so I can make mistakes and you don't have to when it comes to your art. If you end up liking this video and finding it helpful, consider leaving a like or a comment or even subscribing. It really makes all the difference for me, so thank you so much and let's get into it. Now, I want to start off this video by prefacing that making bad art isn't a bad thing. You as an artist are not defined by your best piece of work, and you're certainly not defined by your worst. We're an amalgamation of all of the pieces we create, and it's really important to remember that when we're feeling particularly down on ourselves. It's also important to remember that making bad art is actually a sign of growth. It means that you're challenging yourself, you're trying something you haven't done before, and your brain is kind of fighting to catch back up. There's a reason why it's really easy to draw things that you've drawn 100 times before. Your brain knows how to do it. It feels easy, that muscle memory is there. That's not the case with drawings that are pushing you out of your comfort zone. So the next time you're really struggling with a piece of art, just remind yourself that it's because you're learning, and the next time you attempt something similar, it's going to be just that much easier. So for example, this Link and Zelda piece was definitely out of my comfort zone. I'm really used to drawing character portraits, and usually it's only one character, and while I'll sometimes have slightly detailed backgrounds, they're not nearly as detailed as the one I was trying to accomplish here. So I was way out of my usual realm of comfortability. So by going into this piece and expecting it to be just as easy or as simple as some of the other pieces I've done in the past, I was already setting myself up for failure. I wasn't preparing myself mentally for the fact that it was probably going to take me a little bit longer and was probably going to take more brain power than I usually have to put into these pieces. I think that if I had gone into the process expecting to take a little more time and giving myself that grace, it would have been a less frustrating process, and I would have been a little less disappointed in myself throughout it. It's crucial to remember that drawing is as much of a mind game as it is about skill or technicality. It's about convincing yourself that you actually want to power through, that you want to make art. And if that drive isn't there, it's really hard to power through a piece, at least it is for me. So by going in having this expectation that everything is going to be smooth and easy and then hitting all of these massive roadblocks, it becomes really hard for me to keep a positive mindset. Again, this is why I think it's really important to sort of set realistic expectations for yourself when going into a new piece, preparing yourself for the fact that you might struggle if it's something out of your comfort zone. I find that this makes things a lot more successful for me rather than my brain being shocked that I'm struggling and then sort of shutting down because it wasn't prepared for it. But this piece right here certainly had me shocked. I did not expect to have so much of a struggle with it, even though I probably should have, so I'm going to jump ahead to where I realized that I was really starting to struggle and things were not looking good, and I'll give you my first tip on what I tried to do in the beginning to remedy that. So the first thing I did was really reevaluate the composition. I find that if the composition in a piece is off, it's really hard to make it look good, even if you're doing everything else right, because the rhythm of the piece, the balance is just off. There's this saying in writing that if you write yourself into a corner or you're hitting a massive plot hole or a major roadblock and you can't figure out the solution to it, the problem is earlier on. And I think this is very true for illustration as well. If the composition of your piece is off, this sort of building block that holds everything together and really makes it read, nothing you do is going to help. So the first major issue that I clocked here was Link's pose. It was really awkward and sort of cramped, folding in on itself, and it didn't contribute to a nice flow in the composition. Instead, it made everything feel sort of heavy and squished, so I really wanted to change that up and make it more of a triangle shape connecting him, his sword, and Zelda together. Framing your focal points within a triangle is a really good and easy hack to make your composition readable and function well. It guides the eye between those three lines back and forth and doesn't really let the viewer's eyes wander off of the canvas, which is the ultimate goal in any drawing. Changing up Link's pose definitely made me feel a little better about the composition, but in doing so, I made another massive error. And that's that I ended up splitting, basically bisecting the illustration 50-50 across the horizon line. And this is never something you want to do. You don't want to have your canvas split in half like that. So the really light values in the trees compared to those darker values on the lower half of the canvas really cut the image in half and destroyed any sort of flow or nice compositional elements that I had going. So that had to be my next fix. Because the ultimate goal in any illustration really is to tell a good story, I tried to think of compositional elements I could include that would add to that story. And I thought that a really good idea to sort of break up that horizon line would be to add a shrine. Now, I don't know how you feel about them, but to me, the Breath of the Wild shrines are really difficult to draw. They're kind of complicated, right? So this leads me to my next piece of advice when you're working on a piece that's just not turning out very well, and that's to gather really specific reference. One thing I see a lot of artists do is gather a bunch of different pieces of reference and then try to combine them together, which is a really great thing to do, but when you're really struggling with a piece of art, sometimes it's helpful to have really specific pieces of reference for each component of the drawing. So I'm not talking about copying one specific image exactly as you see it. Instead of gathering a bunch of different references for hands you're trying to draw and then sort of piecing together what your hand would look like based on those photos, just take a picture of your hand in the exact pose that you want and reference that. It's going to be a lot easier. Try to get the lighting as exact as what you're trying to draw as possible. It's going to take a lot of the pressure off of your brain to sort of figure out what things are supposed to look like when you don't really have the right references stored away in your head to make that happen. So to figure out the shrine, for example, I made it really easy on myself and I popped over to Nomad Sculpt and I just 3D modeled the thing. So I would know exactly where everything needed to sit. I could just plop that right in with the right lighting into my illustration and paint over it, making my life a lot easier. 3D models are a fantastic asset to learn about form and value, especially if you're making them yourself. So if you're interested, I definitely recommend learning the very, very basics of 3D modeling. Like me, you do not have to be good at it. It's just to get a super general sense of whatever you're trying to draw. I really recommend it. Once I got that shrine in there, I was feeling a lot more confident about the overall piece, which gave me some hope that I would actually be able to finish it. The next step was removing that really large tree branch from the top of the image. I still wanted to include leaves up there to sort of frame the rest of the piece, but I didn't really like the shape of the tree branch, so I decided it was probably for the best to just get rid of it and start over. Again, when a piece isn't working for you, it is crucial not to be precious about specific elements. You're really gonna probably have to cut a lot and change a lot if you're not liking the way things are looking, and it's good to get comfortable with that. After painting in the shrine and feeling pretty good about that, I wanted to add more storytelling elements that sort of helped shape the world, so I decided that I would add a bunch of flowers that are actually in the game to sort of frame the characters and sit in that foreground and tie everything together. I started with blue nightshade to keep the color scheme cohesive, and later on I'll add a couple more flowers for a little tiny pop of color. I ended up adding warm Cephalina because it has that pop of pink, which contrasts really beautifully with the green since they're complementary colors, and also just adds one other color into the image to sort of brighten everything up. Then I'm adding in a little korok at the bottom of the canvas just to add one more little narrative piece into this illustration. Now, I want to go back to the idea about being too precious with your artwork because it ties into my last tip when you're really struggling with a piece. I think for some artists, and I know for me, there's this sort of sunk cost fallacy when working on a piece of art. I feel like if I've spent X number of hours on it, I might as well power through and finish it, right? But I think that's doing us a disservice as artists. So here's my last piece of advice if you're really struggling with your artwork. If there's a piece that you just cannot get to work, no matter what you do, no matter how much time you spend, you just don't like it, just quit. I know that sounds crazy, but it's okay not to finish a particular art piece. It's actually sort of a good thing. Sometimes things are just not working for you, and learning when you can actually power through and make something work, or when it's best to just scrap it and start over, is a really, really important part of being an artist. About a year or so ago, for example, I had a follower over on my TikTok ask me to draw Mitsuri, and I definitely wanted to do it, but when I sat down to actually make the illustration, it looked so bad. I mean, terrible. I'll put it up on screen right now. And there was just no salvaging it. It was not fun to work on. I felt like I was being held back by my decisions starting out, and I really just wanted to scrap it and start over. So that's what I did. I never finished that particular drawing, and I sketched out a new one, and this is what I ended up with. And at the time, I really liked how it turned out. It was certainly a lot better than my original drawing. The important thing is not letting those failed attempts deter you from trying again. Treat them as a learning experience, take what you learned from them, what worked and what didn't, and apply them to your next drawing. I know a lot of times I have to remind myself that even if something doesn't turn out the way I wanted to, it wasn't a waste of time, and it's hard to remember that, and a lot of times I don't believe myself when I say it, but it really is true. Because as long as we're learning, that's all that really matters, right? So I hope that these tips maybe made you feel a little bit better. I know that there's not an easy answer, but it's really something that every artist deals with, so if you're struggling with your artwork, know that you're not alone. I hope you enjoyed me trying to work this piece out. I think it turned out okay, all things considered, but I'm hoping that the next time things will go a little more smoothly now that I've learned a little bit more. So thank you so much for watching. Again, if you liked it, consider liking, commenting, or subscribing. It really helps me out, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.